The wind howled like a wounded beast as Emma Crawford fought her way through knee-deep snow toward the barn. Her grandfather's weathered farm had never felt so forbidding, the Montana winter turning familiar landmarks into ghostly silhouettes. 3 months since burying her grandparents, and still the pain cut fresh. A strange sound carried through the gale, not the wind's moan, but something alive, something suffering. Emma pulled the barn door open, her frozen fingers burning against cold metal. Lantern light revealed nothing at first, just hay bales and ancient farm equipment. Then she heard it again, a whimper, barely audible. Behind the rusty tractor, a patch of hay shifted. Emma raised her lantern higher, illuminating several pairs of eyes reflecting gold in the dim light. German Shepherd puppies, huddled together, watching her with an alertness that seemed almost calculating. One stepped forward, larger than the others, its stance protective, the dog's gaze locked with hers, challenging yet somehow pleading. What Emma couldn't possibly know then was that saving these animals would not only change her life forever, but would pit her against forces far more powerful than a Montana winter, forces willing to kill to reclaim what they believed was theirs. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Emma Crawford had never imagined herself becoming a Montana farmer at 26. 6 months ago, she'd been climbing the corporate ladder at a prestigious Boston marketing firm, her life mapped out in meticulous 5-year plans. Then came the phone call that shattered everything. Her grandparents' truck had skidded off an icy mountain road, leaving no survivors. The grief had come in waves, threatening to drown her. Her grandparents were the only real family Emma had ever known. After a childhood spent bouncing between foster homes, each one promising permanence, each one eventually sending her away, it was Eleanor and Thomas Crawford who had finally given 13-year-old Emma what she'd always craved, a home without conditions. The decision to leave Boston hadn't been rational. Her therapist called it grief-motivated impulsivity. Her boss called it career suicide. But as Emma stood in her grandparents' farmhouse for the first time after the funeral, surrounded by their belongings, their scent still lingering in the air, she knew she couldn't sell this place to strangers. The farm sat on the edge of civilization, 40 acres nestled against national forest land in western Montana. The nearest neighbor, Martha, lived 2 miles down the dirt road, and the small town of Pine Ridge was a 20-minute drive when roads were clear, closer to an hour in winter weather. Emma was still learning the rhythms of rural life. Her soft city hands had grown calloused from mending fences and hauling hay. Her designer wardrobe had been replaced by practical layers of flannel and denim. Her social circle had shrunk to occasional pleasantries with locals who viewed her with undisguised skepticism. The city girl playing at being a farmer until reality sent her running back to civilization. She won't last the winter. She'd overheard at the general store just last week. Perhaps they were right. Emma's savings were dwindling faster than expected. The ancient farmhouse leaked heat through drafty windows, and despite YouTube tutorials, she still struggled with basic repairs. But beneath her doubts lay a stubborn determination that had carried her through every abandoned childhood home. She would not be the one to leave this time. The puppies, if you could call them that, weren't ordinary strays. Emma knew that much as she crouched in the hay, extending her hand palm up the way her grandfather had taught her to approach unfamiliar dogs. The largest one, clearly the leader, sniffed her fingers with cautious deliberation before allowing a brief touch to its head. "Where did you come from?" Emma whispered. There were 5 of them total, all German shepherds with striking black and tan markings, appearing to be around 3 months old, too young to survive alone, especially in this weather, yet somehow thriving. Their eyes unsettled her, alert, calculating, missing the playful innocence puppies should have when she brought a bucket of water. They waited for the leader to drink first. When she scattered kibble, she'd been saving for the barn cats. They ate in shifts, two always remaining vigilant. Getting them to the house proved unexpectedly simple, rather than needing to be carried or coaxed. They followed her in formation once the leader had decided she wasn't a threat. Inside, Emma created a makeshift pen from old moving boxes in the mudroom, lining it with blankets. "You folks are something else," she murmured, watching them systematically explore their new surroundings. The next morning, Emma called Martha, the only neighbor who'd shown her genuine kindness since her return. "German shepherds, you say?" Martha's voice crackled through the spotty connection. "Purebred, out here. That's mighty strange. Child, nobody round these parts breeds fancy dogs." Martha arrived an hour later, her ancient pickup chugging up the driveway. At 78, she moved slowly, but her eyes missed nothing, especially when it came to animals after 50 years of raising sheep. "These ain't regular farm strays," Martha declared after watching the puppies for several minutes. "Look how they move, synchronized, like they're reading each other's minds." She pointed to subtle ear flicks and body shifts Emma hadn't noticed. "And they're too well fed for runaways. Somebody's been caring for these dogs." Emma had noticed something else. All five had small tattoos inside their ears, numbers rather than the typical identification marks registered breeders used. "Military," Martha suggested, adjusting her thick glasses. "They used to train German shepherds up at the old base before it closed, but that was years ago." Before Emma could respond, headlights swept across the driveway. A county sheriff's SUV pulled up, and a heavy-set man with a perpetual frown emerged. "Sheriff Thompson," Martha acknowledged without warmth. "Miss Williams." He nodded curtly before turning to Emma. "Ms. Crawford, we've had reports of wild dogs in the area, threatening livestock. Your property borders several working farms." "These puppies were abandoned in my barn," Emma replied. "They're hardly a threat." The sheriff peered into the mudroom. "German shepherds. Figured as much." His hand rested uncomfortably close to his holster. "You should know. Folks around here shoot predators that threaten their livestock. Don't matter if they got fancy pedigrees." "Is that a threat, Sheriff?" Emma stood straighter. "Just stating facts. Ma'am, Pine Ridge isn't Boston. We protect our own." After he left, Martha patted Emma's arm. "Sheriff's bluster is worse than his bite. But he's right about one thing. Folks here are suspicious of outsiders, whether they walk on 2 legs or 4. Over the next week, Emma fell into a routine with the dogs. They learned commands with startling speed, seeming to anticipate what she wanted before she fully expressed it. When she let them into the fenced yard, they patrolled the perimeter methodically, never wandering aimlessly like normal puppies. She named the leader Scout for his watchful nature. The others became Shadow, Ranger, Willow, and Duke. Despite their strange behaviors, Emma found herself growing attached. They were outcasts, like her, misjudged, like her. On day 10, a black SUV with tinted windows parked at the end of her driveway. A man in an expensive coat too light for Montana winter emerged, surveying the property through dark sunglasses before approaching. "Ms. Crawford, Robert Blackwell, Pinnacle Timber." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I believe my office has contacted you about our interest in acquiring your property." "They have. I declined. Perhaps you'll reconsider. Our new offer is quite generous." He handed her an envelope. especially given your situation. My situation. A young woman, alone, managing a failing farm in one of Montana's harshest regions. His gaze swept meaningfully toward the house's sagging porch. No disrespect to your grandparents' memory, but this place requires resources you simply don't have. As if sensing her distress, Scout appeared at her side, a low growl rumbling in his chest. The man stepped back, his composure faltering. "Control your animal, Ms. Crawford. He is controlled," Emma replied coolly. "He just doesn't like vultures." After Blackwell departed, Emma watched Scout staring after the vehicle, his posture rigid with alertness. She unfolded the offer letter. The figure made her breath catch. It would solve all her financial worries. But as she looked from the paper to the dog beside her, something felt wrong. Why was a timber company so interested in this particular property? And why now, just after she'd found these unusual dogs? The timing felt too convenient to be coincidence, and Emma Crawford had learned early in life that coincidences usually weren't. The first major confrontation came 3 weeks after Emma found the dogs. She was refilling water troughs when a government-issued truck pulled into her driveway. Forest Service logo emblazoned on its door. The man who stepped out stood over 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and a stern expression that suggested he wasn't accustomed to hearing no. "Jack Thornton, Wildlife Management," he announced, flashing credentials. "I need to see the German shepherds you've been harboring." Emma bristled at his tone. "They're not harbored, they're rescued, and they're doing fine. Thanks for asking." His weathered face remained impassive. "Ma'am, there are protocols for handling abandoned animals, especially ones potentially bred for specialized work. Those dogs need to be surrendered to proper authorities." "What authorities?" "The same ones that abandoned them in a blizzard." Emma crossed her arms. "Show me the law that says I can't rescue strays on my own property." For a moment, something like respect flickered across his face before disappearing behind professional detachment. "May I at least examine them, confirm they're healthy?" Emma reluctantly led him to the barn where the dogs had taken up residence. Having outgrown the mudroom, they'd arranged hay bales into a complex den system that Emma hadn't designed, further evidence of their unusual intelligence. As Thornton approached, all 5 dogs arranged themselves in a defensive formation. Scout at the center. The wildlife officer stopped, studying their behavior with narrowed eyes. "German shepherds don't naturally organize like this," he murmured, more to himself than to Emma. "They're special." Emma replied simply. Thornton crouched, not reaching toward them but allowing Scout to approach on his own terms. "May I?" he asked Emma, indicating the dog's ears. When she nodded, he gently examined the tattoo inside Scout's ear. His expression changed subtly. Surprise, quickly masked. "These numbers, have you researched them?" "Dead ends everywhere," Emma admitted. "I've called shelters, breeders, even the military base Martha mentioned." Thornton straightened. "Ms. Crawford, these aren't ordinary dogs. They've clearly been bred and trained for specific purposes, such as—" "I'm not at liberty to speculate." His tone carried finality. "But I strongly advise you to turn them over to my department for their safety and yours." After he left, promising to return with proper documentation, Emma sank onto a hay bale, Scout's head resting on her knee. The dog's intelligent eyes seemed to ask, "Will you protect us?" "Don't worry," she whispered. "I'm not giving you up." The town meeting 3 days later proved how divided Pine Ridge had become over the Crawford situation. Emma sat in the back of the community center, aware of stares and whispers. Martha settled beside her. A silent ally, Sheriff Thompson, stood at the podium. We've had increasing reports of unusual canine activity around outlying farms. 3 calves lost at the Peterson place. Fencing damaged at the Millers. Those are coyote attacks, Martha called out. Same as every winter. Perhaps, the sheriff conceded. But with 5 large shepherd dogs of unknown origin now in our community, we need to consider all possibilities. Frank Patterson, whose sheep ranch bordered national forest land, stood up. My grandfather lost his entire flock to wild dogs back in '86. Started with just a few strays, ended with 20 sheep slaughtered in one night. I say we don't wait to find out what these animals are capable of. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Emma felt her face flush with anger as she rose. Those wild dogs you're so afraid of haven't left my property. They're well-fed, well-trained, and contained. The real question is, why everyone's so quick to blame newcomers, whether they have 4 legs or 2? An uncomfortable silence followed before Dr. Miranda Coleman, the town's veterinarian, spoke. Has anyone actually examined these animals professionally before we condemn them? Shouldn't we know what we're dealing with? Wildlife management's involved now, Sheriff Thompson replied. Officer Thornton's handling it. From the corner of her eye, Emma saw Jack Thornton slip into the meeting. He remained standing by the door, expression unreadable as he listened. When Emma left the meeting, several people deliberately stepped away as she passed. Only Dr. Coleman approached, offering her card. I'd be happy to check those dogs. Off the record, she said quietly. I worked with service animals before moving to Pine Ridge. Emma thanked her, grateful for another potential ally. Outside, she was surprised to find Thornton waiting by her truck. You're fighting a losing battle, he said without preamble. Small towns fear what they don't understand. Then help them understand, Emma challenged. You know more than you're saying about these dogs. His silence confirmed her suspicion. Why are you really here? Officer Thornton Wildlife Management doesn't typically concern itself with domestic dogs. Those aren't domestic dogs, he replied carefully, and my interest is ensuring they don't suffer unnecessarily by taking them away from someone who cares about them. Something in his expression softened momentarily. Not all caring is enough. Ms. Crawford, sometimes the kindest option isn't the most comfortable one. As she drove home, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that Thornton wasn't being entirely forthcoming about his interest in the dogs. Nor could she dismiss the growing pressure from the community. The attack came 2 nights later. Emma was awakened by Scout's distinctive alert bark, 3 sharp sounds followed by silence. She grabbed her grandfather's shotgun from under the bed and moved to the window. Moonlight revealed 3 coyotes circling the chicken coop. Before she could react, dark shapes streaked across the yard, her 5 shepherds moving with coordinated precision. They didn't attack recklessly, but separated the coyotes with tactical movements that seemed impossible for untrained dogs. Within minutes, the coyotes retreated, one limping, but none seriously injured. The shepherds hadn't fought to kill, only to defend. Emma lowered the shotgun, heart pounding. These weren't just clever dogs, they'd been systematically trained by professionals. The next morning, Martha arrived with concerning news. 2 men were asking about you at the general store. Not locals. Wanted to know about special dogs seen on your property. Emma described the previous night's incident. Martha's weathered face creased with worry. Emma, honey, I've lived here 60 years and never seen dogs behave like military units. Something ain't right. I know, Emma rubbed Scout's ears. But I can't just give them up. Might not be your choice much longer. Town's dividing into sides, those who want the dogs gone and those willing to wait and see. Martha hesitated. And that timber company man's been buying drinks, making friends, talking about how your land would create jobs. Later that day, Emma drove to the small county library and researched specialized canine training programs. Most information led to dead ends. But one article mentioned enhanced training protocols developed for military working dogs that sounded eerily similar to her shepherd's behaviors. As she left the library, Emma spotted Jack Thornton across the street, watching her. Their eyes met briefly before he turned away, disappearing around a corner. Whatever game was being played, Emma realized she was missing critical pieces. The dogs weren't just abandoned pets. The timber company wasn't just interested in trees, and wildlife officer Jack Thornton wasn't telling the whole truth about his interest in 5 extraordinary German shepherds. The January wind cut through Emma's coat as she trudged along her property line, checking fences. Scout padded silently beside her while the other 4 dogs ranged ahead in a practiced pattern. Their behavior continued to amaze her. They communicated through subtle ear movements and posture shifts, coordinating their movements like they'd been working together for years. Your grandfather used to walk this same route every morning, Martha had told her last week. Said it helped him think. Emma understood now. The rhythm of boots crunching snow, the vast Montana sky overhead, the distant mountains standing sentinel. It cleared the mind, and her mind needed clearing. In the month since finding the dogs, her life had become increasingly complicated. Sheriff Thompson had issued a friendly warning about liability for any damage the dogs might cause. Robert Blackwell from Pinnacle Timber called weekly with escalating offers, his tone growing less friendly with each rejection. And 3 more Pine Ridge residents had reported livestock disturbances, though Emma's dogs hadn't left her property. Most troubling were the unmarked vehicles occasionally parked along the county road, occupants watching her farm through binoculars. When approached, they claimed to be bird watchers or photographers, but their military straight postures told a different story. Emma paused at the fence corner, pulling out her grandfather's battered thermos. As she poured steaming coffee, Scout suddenly stiffened, ears forward. The other dogs froze in their positions, attention riveted toward the forest edge. "What is it, boy?" Emma whispered. A moment later, Jack Thornton emerged from the trees, dressed in civilian clothes rather than his usual uniform. "Your dogs knew I was coming before I cleared the tree line," he observed, stopping a respectful distance away. "That's not normal." "Nothing about them is normal," Emma replied. "What are you doing on my property without calling first? Needed to speak with you away from prying eyes." His gaze swept the perimeter. "Your phone's likely monitored." "By whom?" "People interested in specialized canine genetics." He approached slowly, allowing Scout to sniff his outstretched hand. "Your dogs aren't just well-trained, Ms. Crawford. They're part of something bigger." "I've gathered that much." Emma poured a second cup of coffee and offered it as a peace gesture. "What I don't understand is why a wildlife officer cares so much." He accepted the cup but didn't drink immediately. "I wasn't always with wildlife management." "Military." His slight nod confirmed her suspicion. "These dogs are connected to a specialized breeding program, highly classified. They select for intelligence, coordination, longevity, abilities that make them valuable. To whom? Various interests." His evasiveness frustrated her. "The point is, you're in over your head. These aren't pets." "Ms. Crawford." Emma, she corrected. And they're not weapons either. They're living beings who were abandoned in a blizzard. They weren't abandoned, Jack said quietly. They escaped. The revelation hung between them like frost in the air. Back at the farmhouse, Emma uncovered a leather-bound journal in her grandfather's desk, one she'd overlooked during her initial grief-hazed clearing of his belongings. The handwriting was cramped and hurried. Unlike his usual careful penmanship, what she read confirmed her growing suspicions. November 14th, 2018. Another one found its way here today, third this year. Same markings as the other's tattoo inside left ear. Getting too old for this, but who else will help them? Page after page documented Thomas Crawford's secret work harboring escaped special program dogs, rehabilitating them, occasionally rehoming them with trusted contacts across state lines. The most recent entry was dated just 2 weeks before his fatal accident. Military contractor called Blackridge apparently took over the program, standard slipping. These new dogs showing physical issues the originals never had. Ethics being damned for profit, as usual. Emma's hands trembled. Blackridge, similar to Blackwell from Pinnacle Timber. The coincidence seemed unlikely. When Martha arrived that afternoon, Emma showed her the journal. "Can't say I'm surprised." The older woman sighed. "Your grandfather was always rescuing things: wounded deer, orphaned raccoons, abandoned dogs. Man couldn't turn away suffering." She adjusted her glasses to examine the journal. "But this is different. Military programs, corporations. Tom was swimming in dangerous waters. And now I am too," Emma said. Martha squeezed her hand. "Difference is, you're not swimming alone, child." The relationship between Emma and Jack evolved cautiously over the following weeks. He began visiting regularly, ostensibly to monitor the situation. But Emma sensed other motives. The dogs accepted him with unusual ease, particularly Scout, who sometimes even sought out Jack's attention. "They recognize you," Emma observed one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the dogs patrol the yard. "You've worked with their kind before." Jack was silent for a long moment. "I trained the original breeding stock," he finally admitted. "Best dogs I ever worked with. Intelligent. Loyal. They deserved better than they got. What happened? Program changed hands. Military to private contractor. Original goals creating dogs with enhanced working abilities for search and rescue. Disaster response shifted toward security applications." His face hardened. "When I objected to certain training methods, I was reassigned, eventually left altogether, and became a wildlife officer in the middle of nowhere. Montana." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Seemed like a good place to disappear. Until 5 familiar-looking German shepherds showed up. Exactly. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. "Emma, those men watching your property, they're not going away, and Blackwell isn't interested in timber rights." "He's with Blackridge," Emma said. "My grandfather's journal mentioned them." Jack's expression confirmed her guess. "They've invested millions in this program. Those dogs represent valuable intellectual property to them." "They're not property," Emma said firmly. "I agree, but they'll use every legal means and some not so legal to reclaim them." Emma considered this. "So why are you helping me instead of them? You're risking your cover." Jack didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. "Because 20 years in the military taught me that doing what's right isn't always the same as following orders." Financial pressures mounted as winter deepened. The farm's ancient furnace failed during a cold snap. requiring expensive repairs. Emma took odd jobs in town bookkeeping for the feed store. Weekend shifts at the diner but barely kept ahead of bills. Each trip to town revealed growing community divisions. Some residents, like Dr. Coleman and the librarian, Mrs. Patterson, greeted her warmly. Others turned away or whispered behind their hands. Sheriff Thompson watched her with undisguised suspicion. Yet the dogs provided unexpected bridges. When Frank Patterson's granddaughter wandered away during a family picnic, Scout led Emma straight to the disoriented child 2 miles from where she'd last been seen. The grateful family became cautious allies. When record snowfall collapsed Mrs. Johnson's barn roof, threatening her livery business, Emma volunteered her dogs to help clear debris and rescue trapped horses. Their precision and care impressed even skeptical onlookers. "Never seen shepherds work like that," old Mr. Garfield commented, watching Ranger and Willow gently herd a panicked colt to safety, almost like they understand exactly what needs doing. "They're special," Emma replied, the phrase becoming her standard explanation. As February turned to March, Emma established a routine with the dogs that leveraged their exceptional abilities. She designed obstacle courses that challenged their problem-solving skills and coordination. They thrived under the structured training, growing stronger and more confident. Scout, in particular, developed a profound bond with Emma. He slept outside her bedroom door, anticipated her needs, and communicated through an expanding vocabulary of distinct vocalizations. The others, Shadow, Ranger, Willow, and Duke, maintained their pack structure but increasingly accepted Emma as their leader. "It's remarkable," Dr. Sarah Coleman noted during a checkup visit. "They've maintained their specialized training but adapted it to civilian life. I've never seen anything like it." "Can you tell how old they are?" Emma asked. "Based on dentition, around 7 to 8 months. Still adolescents. Developmentally speaking, their adult potential." The veterinarian shook her head in wonder. "It's extraordinary." Late one night, Emma was startled awake by Scout's low warning growl. She reached for her phone and found a text from Jack. "Company coming. Not friendly. Get to the root cellar. Bringing help." Heart pounding, Emma pulled on clothes, grabbed her grandfather's shotgun, and hurried to wake Martha, who had been staying over due to her own home's failing electricity. "Those corporate vultures finally making their move," the older woman muttered, reaching for her coat with surprising agility. "Your grandfather prepared for this. There's a hidden exit from the root cellar that leads to the old mining tunnel." "I'm not running," Emma said, checking the shotgun's load. Martha fixed her with a stern gaze. "Thomas Crawford didn't raise a fool for a granddaughter. We go to the cellar, assess the situation, and make smart decisions, not heroic ones." The dogs needed no commands to understand the danger. They moved in coordinated silence, Scout leading Emma and Martha to the root cellar, while the others positioned themselves strategically around the property. From the cellar's small ventilation window, Emma watched headlights approach 3 vehicles moving with military precision. No running lights. Men in dark clothing deployed around the barn and house, carrying what looked like tranquilizer rifles. "They're here for the dogs," she whispered. "And they'll claim legal right to them," Martha replied grimly. "Military property, dangerous animals, national security, whatever excuse works." A familiar pickup appeared at the end of the driveway. Jack Thornton had arrived. To Emma's surprise, several other vehicles followed Dr. Sars Coleman's SUV, Frank Patterson's truck, and others she recognized from town. "Cavalry's here." Martha grinned. "Your grandfather had a saying, in small towns, feuds run deep, but loyalty runs deeper. Looks like you've earned some loyalty, child. Outside, a confrontation unfolded. Through the window, Emma could see Jack standing his ground against a suited man gesturing angrily. Community members formed a line behind Jack, creating a standoff. "We need to get out there," Emma said, reaching for the cellar door. Martha caught her arm. "Wait. Thomas didn't just hide dogs all these years. He gathered evidence." She pointed to a locked cabinet Emma had assumed contained canning supplies. "Combination is your birthday." Inside, Emma found folders of documents, photographs, and what appeared to be internal memos on Blackridge letterhead, evidence of unauthorized breeding programs, violations of animal welfare laws, and most damning proof that the military contract Blackridge claimed had been terminated years ago. By the time Emma emerged from the cellar, the confrontation had reached a stalemate. Robert Blackwell, now openly identifying himself as Blackridge Security, stood flanked by men with military bearing. Sheriff Thompson hovered uncertainly between the groups. "Those dogs are specialized military assets," Blackwell was saying, "developed under classified programs with significant national investment." "Show me the paperwork," Jack demanded. "Current, valid paperwork, not something from a program that was officially terminated 3 years ago." Blackwell's expression tightened. "Officer Thornton, your history with this program makes your interference particularly problematic. My history gives me particular insight into your company's ethics." Jack replied evenly. Emma stepped forward, documents in hand. "These dogs were abandoned, no. They escaped because of mistreatment. My grandfather documented everything." She addressed Sheriff Thompson directly, including illegal activities on private property, animal cruelty violations, and corporate fraud, enough to interest state authorities and probably federal ones, too. Blackwell's composure cracked. "Those documents are classified, not according to these memos from the Department of Defense," Emma countered. Thanking her corporate background for teaching her to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. The program was decommissioned. Any claim Blackridge has on these animals expired years ago. Scout appeared at Emma's side, the other dogs materializing from the shadows to form a protective formation around the community members. Their disciplined presence, neither threatening nor retreating, spoke volumes. Sheriff Thompson, sensing the changing winds, straightened his posture. "Seems to me we've got disputed property claims at best, potential criminal activity at worst." He turned to Blackwell. "I suggest you take this to proper legal channels rather than conducting midnight raids in my jurisdiction." Martha stepped forward, her small frame somehow imposing, and while the court sorted out, "Those dogs stay right here where Thomas Crawford would have wanted them, with family." Blackwell's cold gaze promised this wasn't over, but faced with united community resistance and potential legal exposure, he signaled his men to withdraw. As the vehicles retreated down the driveway, Jack moved to Emma's side. "That was just round one," he warned quietly. "I know." Emma watched Scout tracking the departing intruders, his posture alert but no longer alarmed. "But they know now they're not just fighting me. They're fighting a community." For the first time since returning to Montana, Emma felt the stirrings of true belonging to this land, to these people, and to 5 extraordinary dogs who had somehow transformed from mysterious burden to profound purpose. The April thaw brought muddy roads and fresh tensions to Pine Ridge. 2 months had passed since the midnight confrontation, and while Blackridge had retreated temporarily, Emma knew they were merely regrouping. Blackwell's final words, "This isn't over, Ms. Crawford," weren't an empty threat but a promise. Emma used the respite to prepare. Jack helped reinforce the property's security, installing motion sensors and trail cameras. Martha introduced Emma to her network of old-timers who'd known Thomas Crawford for decades, filling in gaps about her grandfather's secret work with the dogs. Dr. Coleman conducted thorough examinations of all 5 shepherds, documenting their exceptional health and abilities for potential legal proceedings. The dogs themselves continued to thrive. Now, approaching their first birthday, they'd grown into magnificent animals, powerful, disciplined, and remarkably bonded to Emma and each other. Scout had developed an almost uncanny ability to anticipate Emma's needs, often retrieving tools before she realized she needed them, or alerting her to maintenance issues around the farm before they became critical. The community remained divided, but increasingly curious rather than hostile. Emma began allowing supervised visits from supportive neighbors, demonstrating the dog's gentleness with children and exceptional training. When Frank Patterson's arthritis flared so badly he couldn't move his sheep to spring pasture, Emma and her dogs accomplished in one afternoon what would have taken his ranch hands 3 days. "Never seen anything like it," Patterson admitted, watching Shadow and Duke gently but firmly guide reluctant ewes through a narrow gate. "They work better than any border collies I've ever owned. Different training," Emma explained carefully. "They were bred for special operations." Patterson nodded thoughtfully. "Military has its problems, but they sure know how to train a working dog." He scratched Duke behind the ears, a privilege the once wary shepherd now accepted from trusted humans. Shame someone tried to throw away good animals like these. Word of the shepherd's abilities spread, bringing cautious requests for assistance with difficult livestock management, search operations for lost hikers, and even therapy visits to the town's small nursing home, where residents delighted in the dog's dignified company. Jack watched these developments with mixed emotions. "You're making them visible," he warned one evening as they walked the property's perimeter. "Could be dangerous." "Hiding them didn't work," Emma countered. "Integration might be their best protection. The more people who value them, the harder it becomes for Blackridge to make them disappear." He couldn't argue with her logic. "Just be careful. Blackridge operates through legal channels when possible, but they're not above other methods." Emma had seen enough to believe him. Strange cars still occasionally appeared on the county road. Her email account showed signs of attempted breaches, and the latest offer from Pinnacle Timber had contained veiled references to her grandfather's accident that sent chills down her spine. "You think they had something to do with my grandparents' deaths?" she asked Martha one rainy afternoon. The older woman measured her words carefully. "That road's treacherous in winter even for experienced drivers." But Thomas had been making noise about going public with his documentation. The timing... She didn't need to finish. Emma had been connecting similar dots herself. The situation escalated on a stormy night in late April. Emma was awakened by Scout's alert bark, not the warning of casual intruders, but something more urgent. She grabbed the shotgun and her phone, texting Jack their prearranged danger signal before moving to the window. Through sheets of rain, she made out multiple figures approaching from the tree line, using the storm for cover. This wasn't a legal team serving papers. These were tactical operators moving with practiced precision toward the barn where the dogs usually slept. Emma slipped downstairs, grateful she'd insisted the dogs sleep in the house during bad weather. All 5 were now alert, watching her with focused intensity, awaiting direction. "Silent," she whispered, using the hand signal Jack had taught her. The dogs immediately ceased vocalizing but remained vigilant. Emma had anticipated this moment, had planned for it, but the reality of armed men targeting her home sent her heart racing. She took a steadying breath. then moved to activate the property's new alarm system, not to sound alerts, but to transmit distress signals to pre-programmed contacts. The intruders had nearly reached the barn when floodlights suddenly illuminated the yard, triggered by Emma's remote control. Caught in the harsh glare, 5 men in tactical gear froze momentarily before raising what appeared to be tranquilizer rifles. Emma stepped onto the porch, shotgun visible but pointed safely upward. "This is private property," she called out, her voice stronger than she felt. "You are trespassing and have been recorded. Law enforcement has been notified." The leader gestured sharply, and 2 men broke toward the house while the others continued toward the barn. Emma raised the shotgun. "I wouldn't. We're here for government property." "Ma'am," the leader called back. "Military working dogs reported missing. Just step back inside and let us do our job." "Those dogs aren't government property. I have documentation proving the program was decommissioned. You have no legal right to be here." The men continued advancing. Apparently calling her bluff, Emma fired a warning shot into the air. The sharp crack momentarily paused the intruders, but their hesitation was brief. "Last chance to cooperate," the leader shouted, voice hardening. "We're authorized to use necessary force to secure those animals." The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Emma stepped back toward the door, prepared to retreat inside with the dogs and barricade until help arrived. But before she could move, the sound of approaching vehicles cut through the rain, headlights sweeping the drive as 3 trucks roared onto her property. Jack Thornton leapt from the first before it fully stopped. Rifle in hand, Sheriff Thompson emerged from the second, flanked by 2 deputies. From the third came Frank Patterson and his son, both carrying shotguns. "Federal Wildlife Service," Jack announced, badge extended. "Drop your weapons and stand down." The intruders hesitated, clearly not expecting organized resistance. "You heard the man," Sheriff Thompson added, his cruiser's lights painting the scene in red and blue. On the ground, hands where I can see them. For a tense moment, it seemed the Blackridge team might resist. Then the leader slowly lowered his weapon, signaling his men to do the same. "This is a federal matter," he insisted. "Those animals are classified military assets." "Save it," Jack interrupted. "Your operation was officially terminated 3 years ago. Any claim you had to these animals expired with your contract." He produced an official-looking document. "I have confirmation directly from DOD that no recovery operation has been authorized. You're conducting an illegal operation on private property." As the deputies moved to secure the intruders, Emma felt weak with relief. Scout pressed against her leg, offering silent support. Jack approached once the situation was contained. "You okay?" Emma nodded, suddenly exhausted. "How did you get the sheriff to help? He's never exactly been on my side." "Turns out Thompson doesn't appreciate private military contractors operating in his jurisdiction without proper authorization. Threatens his authority." Jack's expression was grim. This was a desperate move on Blackridge's part. Means they're worried about what your grandfather's documentation might reveal. What happens now? "We've bought some time, but Blackridge has connections in high places. They'll regroup. Try legal channels next." Sheriff Thompson joined them, expression uncharacteristically somber. "Ms. Crawford, much as it pains me to admit it, Thornton's right. These fellows are headed for a cell tonight. But don't expect them to stay there long. Corporate lawyers will have them out by morning." He studied the dogs now, sitting calmly at Emma's feet. "I owe you an apology. Seems I misread the situation. Water under the bridge, Sheriff," Emma replied, too tired for grudges. "Well, just so you know, Frank's organized a neighborhood watch. folks taking shifts, keeping an eye on your place. A hint of the old gruffness returned. Don't get the wrong idea, they're mostly protecting a community asset. Those dogs of yours saved the Wilkins boy last week. Emma hadn't expected this development. Thank you. After the sheriff departed and the property was secured, Jack insisted on staying the night. They might try again, he explained, checking windows and doors. Emma didn't argue. The night's events had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. Why are these dogs so important to Blackridge? Important enough to risk breaking multiple laws? Jack's expression darkened. It's not just the dogs themselves. Though they represent millions in development costs, it's what they represent, proof of an unauthorized program. Your grandfather's documentation could expose government contracts obtained through bribes, training methods that violated ethical standards, program extensions that were never properly approved. Enough to hurt Blackridge badly, enough to destroy them and send some very powerful people to prison. That night, Emma couldn't sleep despite her exhaustion. She sat at the kitchen table with Scout's head in her lap, reviewing her grandfather's journals and documentation. Jack dozed in a chair by the door, his rifle within reach. "What would you do, Grandpa?" she whispered. Thomas Crawford had spent years quietly rescuing these extraordinary animals, balancing secrecy with safety. Now that burden had passed to her, magnified by Blackridge's growing desperation, Scout looked up at her with those intelligent eyes that seemed to understand far more than a dog should. In that moment, Emma made her decision. Hiding hadn't worked. Legal maneuvering was a stopgap at best. It was time to bring everything into the light. The community council meeting the following week became the arena for this confrontation. Emma had requested emergency time on the agenda, and curiosity had packed the small town hall with nearly every Pine Ridge resident. Sheriff Thompson maintained order while casting occasional concerned glances toward Emma. Robert Blackwell sat with 3 suits corporate lawyers, undoubtedly their expressions suggesting absolute confidence in their position. They'd spent the week filing motions claiming ownership of the Shepherds, attempting to secure a court order for their surrender. Emma approached the podium, acutely aware of whispers and stares. Jack nodded encouragingly from the back of the room, where he stood with Martha and Dr. Coleman. "Most of you know me as Thomas Crawford's granddaughter," Emma began, her voice steadier than she expected. "The outsider who came back to a farm she barely knew how to run 6 months ago." That description was accurate. She paused, surveying the room. But something happened that changed everything. I found 5 extraordinary dogs abandoned in my barn during a blizzard, German shepherds with unusual training and remarkable abilities. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Many had now witnessed the dogs' capabilities firsthand. What you don't know is that these dogs represent something bigger, evidence of a classified military program that went rogue after privatization. My grandfather discovered this years ago and began quietly rescuing dogs that escaped or were discarded from this program. Emma held up Thomas Crawford's journal. He documented everything: illegal breeding practices, unauthorized experiments, violations of government contracts. When he threatened to expose the truth, he was— She faltered momentarily. "I believe he was silenced." The room fell silent. Even Sheriff Thompson leaned forward intently. Blackridge Security, operating here under the name Pinnacle Timber, wants these dogs not because they're valuable assets, though they are, but because they're evidence that could bring down their entire operation. Blackwell rose smoothly. "These are serious allegations, Ms. Crawford, potentially slanderous ones, unsupported by credible evidence." The simple truth is that these animals are specialized working dogs developed under government contract for national security purposes. Their recovery is a matter of public interest. If that's true, Emma countered, then why the midnight raid? Why the shell companies and false pretenses? Why not simply present valid paperwork and take legal custody? She turned to address the community directly. I'm not asking you to fight my battles. These dogs aren't just my responsibility, they were my grandfather's legacy. But Pine Ridge has always valued independence, honesty, and standing against bullies. That's why I'm asking for your help. Not to protect me, but to protect the truth. Frank Patterson stood, his weathered face serious. Those dogs found my granddaughter when she was lost in the national forest, tracked her 5 miles through rough country when the search and rescue teams couldn't find a trace. He looked directly at Blackwell. I don't much care who developed them or how. They're here now, doing good work. And Ms. Crawford's treating them right. Far as I'm concerned, they've earned their place. Others rose to speak the mother whose son had been rescued from a mine shaft, the elderly couple whose livestock had been saved during the flood, the nursing home director who described the comfort the dogs brought to veterans suffering from PTSD. Dr. Coleman provided professional testimony about the dogs' health and behavior. Whatever their origins, these animals are thriving under Miss Crawford's care. Removing them now would cause significant trauma and potentially undo months of successful integration. Throughout these testimonials, Blackwell's expression remained impassive, but Emma noted his lawyers exchanging concerned glances. Public opinion was clearly shifting against them, creating witnesses any future legal proceedings would have to address. When the council finally called for a resolution, the vote was decisive. Pine Ridge formally recognized Emma's ownership of the dogs and committed to supporting her against unwarranted outside interference. It wasn't legally binding, but it represented something powerful, a community unified against corporate intimidation. As the meeting adjourned, Blackwell approached Emma, his smile cold. Touching display of small-town solidarity. Ms. Crawford, unfortunately, these matters aren't decided by community councils, but by federal courts, where we have considerable influence. Perhaps, Emma replied evenly. But courts consider community standards and public interest, and they definitely consider evidence of corporate malfeasance. She nodded toward Jack, who was speaking with a man Emma didn't recognize. Your raid last night attracted attention from quarters even your connections can't easily dismiss. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Blackwell's face as he recognized Jack's companion, a federal prosecutor known for high-profile corporate cases. This isn't over, Blackwell said, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. On that, Emma agreed. We're finally in agreement. The first signs of Scout's illness appeared subtly, a slight hesitation before jumping into Emma's truck. Occasional listlessness, where there had once been constant alertness. Emma might have dismissed these changes as normal fatigue, if not for Dr. Poe Coleman's worried expression during the German Shepherd's monthly checkup. His blood work shows some concerning markers, the veterinarian explained, showing Emma the results. Elevated liver enzymes, unusual white blood cell counts. I'd like to run more comprehensive tests. Could it be something simple? A virus or infection? Emma asked, her hand resting protectively on Scout's head. Possibly, Dr. Coleman replied, not meeting Emma's eyes. But given his background, there could be other factors. Emma understood the unspoken implication. The breeding program that produced these extraordinary dogs might have prioritized performance over long-term health, like thoroughbred racehorses or specialized show dogs. Genetic complications could emerge as they matured. The following weeks brought a battery of tests and consultations with specialists. Emma drove Scout to the veterinary college in Bozeman, 3 hours each way, draining her already strained finances. Jack accompanied them when possible, his face growing increasingly grim with each inconclusive result. The program directors were always concerned about longevity. He admitted one evening as they drove back from a particularly disheartening appointment. Scout lay across the back seat, unusually subdued. These dogs were expensive to develop. If they had short working lives. He didn't finish the thought. But Emma understood. A military asset that broke down prematurely was a poor investment. May brought gentle warming to the mountains, painting the landscape in tentative greens. Scout rallied briefly, seeming more like his old self as he led the other dogs in their morning patrols. Emma allowed herself cautious hope that whatever had affected him was temporary. Martha, who had become a fixture at the farm, watched Scout with knowing eyes. "My Hank was like that," she said one afternoon, referring to her late husband. "Good days that made you think the bad ones were behind you. Then the cancer would remind us it was still there." "The tests didn't show cancer," Emma replied too quickly. Martha patted her hand. "I'm not saying it's the same, child. Just that illness has its own timeline, regardless of our hopes." The legal battle with Blackridge continued in parallel to Scout's health struggles. The corporation had filed motions in federal court claiming ownership of the dogs as developed assets. Emma's attorney provided pro bono through Jack's connections, countered with evidence that the program had been officially terminated, rendering any ownership claims void. Meanwhile, Emma's financial situation grew increasingly precarious. Medical bills for Scout mounted alongside legal expenses and the farm's ongoing needs. She took additional shifts at the diner and sold her grandfather's antique rifle collection. But it wasn't enough. The reality of potentially losing both Scout and the farm began to weigh on her with crushing inevitability. Jack noticed her exhaustion. "You need to rest," he insisted, having arrived to find Emma asleep at the kitchen table, paperwork scattered around her. "What I need is money," Emma replied, too tired for pretense, "and time, neither of which I have." To her surprise, Pine Ridge rallied again. Frank Patterson quietly arranged for hay deliveries left over from his fields. Martha organized a rotation of casseroles and baked goods from church ladies. The feed store owner found an accounting error that happened to reduce Emma's outstanding balance. None mentioned Scout's illness directly. Mountain people respected the privacy of suffering, but their support spoke volumes. June arrived with uncharacteristic ferocity, bringing storms that lashed the mountains and flooded creeks. On the night, everything changed. Rain hammered the farmhouse roof like artillery fire. Emma sat on the floor beside Scout's bed, reviewing medical options she couldn't afford with Jack and Dr. Wall Coleman. "There's an experimental treatment program at Colorado State," the veterinarian explained, pointing to printouts. "They're specifically studying genetic issues in working dogs. Scout would be an ideal candidate." "The cost?" Emma asked, already knowing the answer would be impossible. "Doctor." Coleman's hesitation confirmed her fears. "Insurance won't cover experimental treatments, especially for animals with complicated ownership status." Jack's jaw tightened. "I have some savings." "No," Emma interrupted firmly. "You've already done too much." The conversation might have continued if not for Shadow's sudden alert bark from the porch, different from the usual warning. Carrying an edge of immediate danger, Scout raised his head. struggling to his feet despite his weakness. Jack moved to the window, rifle already in hand. Vehicle, no lights, coming fast. Emma's heart sank. After weeks of legal maneuvering, had Blackridge decided to return to direct action? She reached for her shotgun, but Jack shook his head. Just one vehicle, not their style. His expression changed suddenly. It's swerving, out of control. The sound of metal striking wood cut through the storm's roar, a vehicle hitting a tree near the driveway. Doctor. Coleman grabbed her medical bag instinctively. Could be injured, despite the potential threat. Emma couldn't ignore someone in trouble. She grabbed her rain jacket and followed Jack onto the porch, Scout insisting on accompanying them despite his condition, through sheets of rain. Emma made out a black SUV crumpled against an ancient oak at her driveway's entrance. Jack approached cautiously, weapon ready, while Emma provided cover from behind. To their shock, the driver's door opened to reveal Robert Blackwell, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. "Crawford!" he gasped, struggling to remain standing. "They're coming! Rogue faction! Clean sweep protocol!" Before Emma could process this cryptic warning, Scout suddenly stiffened, emitting a low growl that raised the hair on her neck. The other shepherds materialized from the shadows, forming a protective formation despite the driving rain. "Someone else is here," Jack said quietly, scanning the tree line. The first shot came without warning, a crack that sent splinters flying from the porch post beside Emma. She ducked instinctively as Jack returned fire, pulling her behind the dubious cover of Blackwell's damaged vehicle. "Multiple hostiles," Jack reported grimly. "Professional, military-grade equipment. Blackridge. Some of them, others I don't recognize." He checked his ammunition. "We need to get back to the house." The distance was only 30 yards, but across open ground in driving rain, under enemy fire, it might as well have been miles. Emma's mind raced. Doctor Coleman was still inside, probably calling for help. But in rural Montana, sheriff's deputies were at least 20 minutes away. A second volley of shots kicked up mud near their position. Blackwell groaned, clutching his side where blood now seeped through his expensive shirt. "Not supposed to be like this," he muttered. "Assets recovery. Not this." "What is this exactly?" Emma demanded, fear giving way to anger. "Clean up," he replied, his voice weakening. "Too much exposure. Liability." Jack's expression hardened. "They're eliminating witnesses. All of us." The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. The attackers were advancing under cover of darkness and storm, using coordinated movements to close the noose. Emma realized with stunning clarity that she might die here, on the land her grandparents had loved. Alongside the dogs she had fought to protect, Scout seemed to sense her thoughts. Despite his illness, he stood alert beside her, his eyes reflecting determined purpose. A silent communication passed between them, the same connection that had been building since that first night in the barn. Without warning, Scout bolted from cover, charging toward the closest attacker with startling speed. The other shepherds followed his lead, breaking in different directions to create chaos among the organized assault team. Shots rang out, and Emma screamed, certain she was witnessing Scout's sacrifice. But the German shepherd's training proved superior even in his weakened state. He dodged the initial shots and launched himself at the attacker. A blur of wet fur and disciplined fury, the man went down hard, his weapon discharging harmlessly into the air. "Now, du boy," Jack shouted, grabbing Emma's arm and pulling her toward the house. They ran through the downpour, Jack providing covering fire while Emma supported the now stumbling Blackwell. Behind them, the sounds of combat continued, men shouting in confusion as the highly trained dogs disrupted their formation, attacking and retreating with tactical precision. They had nearly reached the porch when Emma heard Scout's pained yelp cut through the chaos. She turned to see him stumbling, red blooming across his rain-soaked coat. Despite the injury, he continued fighting, positioning himself between the attackers and Emma's path to safety. "Scout!" she screamed, but Jack pulled her bodily onto the porch. "Inside. Now, you can't help him by getting killed." Dr. Coleman yanked open the door, pulling them into the relative safety of the house. "Deputies are on their way," she reported, immediately moving to assess Blackwell's wounds. Emma rushed to the window, desperate for a view of Scout. What she saw froze her blood, her loyal protector standing his ground despite obvious injury. The other shepherds continuing to harass the attackers, but clearly recognizing Scout's distress. As she watched in horror, Scout launched one final charge, taking down an attacker who had been aiming directly at the house. At Emma, the man's weapon discharged at point-blank range. Scout fell. Everything after that moment became a blur of motion and emotion. Jack restraining Emma from running outside, the distant wail of sirens, the attackers retreating into the forest as law enforcement approached, and later, cradling Scout's bloodied body on the porch, his breathing shallow, his once bright eyes growing dim. "Stay with me," Emma pleaded, rain mingling with tears on her face. "Please, Scout, we've come so far." But as the storm raged around them, Emma Crawford faced the cruelest truth of her journey, that sometimes love isn't enough to save what matters most. Emma sat motionless beside the hospital bed, her hand resting lightly on Scout's fur between the medical equipment connections. The veterinary hospital in Bozeman had admitted him directly to emergency surgery upon their arrival at dawn. Dr. Coleman calling ahead and pulling every professional favor she possessed. For 14 hours, Emma had existed in a fog of exhaustion and dread, barely registering Jack's steady presence or Martha's quiet prayers. He shouldn't have survived. Dr. Reichman, the chief surgeon, had told them afterward, the blood loss alone would have killed most dogs. Not to mention the trauma and his pre-existing condition, I've never seen anything like his will to live. Now Scout lay sedated but stable, his powerful body made vulnerable by bandages and IV lines. The rhythmic beep of monitoring equipment provided the only soundtrack to Emma's vigil. Jack entered quietly, carrying coffee. The cuts on his face from the previous night's battle had been treated, but still looked raw and painful. Sheriff called. "They've got 3 of the attackers in custody. 2 others escaped but left blood trails they're being tracked." Emma nodded without looking up. "Blackwell's stabilized." Jack continued. "Once they removed the bullet and stopped the internal bleeding, his prognosis improved significantly. He's been placed under federal protective custody." "Is he talking?" Emma asked, her voice rough from disuse. "Apparently he hasn't stopped, trying to save himself by giving up everyone involved." Jack sat beside her, his shoulder brushing hers in silent support. "The FBI has taken over the investigation. This goes beyond Blackridge, now possible connections to Defense Department corruption, contract fraud, even political influence peddling." Under different circumstances, Emma might have felt vindication. Her grandfather had been right all along. The program was corrupt, illegal, and now exposed. But sitting beside Scout's broken body, such victories seemed hollow. "None of that matters if he dies," she whispered. Jack's hand covered hers. "I know." Emma wasn't permitted to stay overnight at the veterinary hospital. Despite her protests, Jack drove her to a nearby motel, practically carrying her exhausted body into the room. "You need sleep," he insisted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I'll wake you if there's any change." But sleep brought nightmares. Scout falling in the rain, blood spreading across his fur, her grandparents' truck plunging off an icy road, faceless men in tactical gear emerging from her barn. Emma woke gasping, sheets tangled around her legs, momentarily disoriented until Jack's voice anchored her. "You're safe," he said simply, sitting in a chair by the window where he'd apparently been keeping watch. "It's just past 4. No calls from the hospital." Emma sat up, rubbing her face. "How is any of this happening?" Jack. 6 months ago, I was a marketing executive worried about presentation deadlines. Now I'm in the middle of some government conspiracy with people trying to kill me over dogs. Not just dogs," Jack corrected gently. "Evidence, witnesses, loose ends." "My grandparents," Emma said. The question had haunted her for months, but now she needed certainty. "It wasn't an accident, was it?" Jack hesitated before answering. "The FBI is reopening the investigation. They found irregularities in the initial accident report, inconsistencies in road conditions, unusual damage patterns on the vehicle." Emma absorbed this confirmation of her worst fears. "They died because of what they knew, what my grandfather documented. Thomas Crawford was a principled man who stumbled onto something powerful people wanted kept secret. He protected those dogs at great personal risk because he believed it was right." Jack's voice softened. "That courage didn't skip a generation, Emma?" She turned away, unable to accept praise when she felt so fundamentally broken. "I've lost everything that matters. The farm's mortgaged beyond saving. Scout's dying. Even if the other dogs survive this, Blackridge will find some legal angle to take them." "That's not necessarily true." Jack reached for his jacket, removing a weathered leather notebook from an inner pocket. "This was in your grandfather's lockbox, the one Martha showed you. Given last night's attack, I thought it might be safer with me." Emma recognized the journal similar to others her grandfather had kept, but smaller, more worn. "I've never seen this one." "Because he kept it hidden, even from you." Jack handed it to her. "It's his contingency plan. Emma, your grandfather was afraid something might happen to him, so he created insurance." Inside the journal, Thomas Crawford had meticulously documented names, dates, account numbers, and government contracts, detailed recordings of conversations with Blackridge executives admitting program violations, photographs of facilities never officially acknowledged. Most significantly, contact information for journalists, oversight committee members, and military officials sympathetic to his concerns. He built a dead man's switch, Jack explained. Instructions about who to contact and what evidence to release if something happened to him. He just never got the chance to activate it. Or someone prevented him from doing so, Emma added grimly. Until now, you haven't had the full picture. But with Blackwell talking and your grandfather's complete documentation... Jack's eyes held steady confidence. "This changes everything, Emma." By morning, Emma had formulated a plan. While Scout recovered under veterinary supervision, she would execute her grandfather's contingency strategy not from fear or vengeance, but for justice and protection. First, she contacted Senator James Harris, her grandfather's former military colleague now serving on the Armed Services Committee. The elderly senator remembered Thomas Crawford fondly and was appalled by Emma's evidence of program abuses. "I always wondered why Tom stopped our annual fishing trip so abruptly," Harris said during their video call. Now it makes sense he was protecting me from involvement. Classic Tom. His expression hardened. I'll convene a confidential committee briefing immediately. This needs proper oversight, not a public spectacle that might compromise national security. Next, Emma arranged secure transfers of her grandfather's documentation to 3 separate attorneys, including the federal prosecutor Jack had introduced at the town meeting. Each received specific instructions about when and how to release information if Emma or her allies were threatened again. Your grandfather was methodical, the prosecutor observed, reviewing the materials. This creates significant leverage. Black Ridge executives are already facing serious charges from last night's attack. Add this evidence of long-term malfeasance, and they'll be competing to cooperate first. While Emma worked, Martha coordinated with community members to secure the farm, establishing round-the-clock protection for the remaining shepherds. Dr. Coleman divided her time between Bozeman, monitoring Scout's treatment, and Pine Ridge, ensuring the other dogs received proper care during Emma's absence. Through it all, Jack remained Emma's steadfast support, his military experience and government connections proving invaluable. They worked side by side during days and collapsed into restless sleep in adjacent motel rooms at night, neither acknowledging the growing bond between them beyond what the crisis demanded. On the 3rd day, during a brief hospital visit, Emma was approached by an unusually deferential Robert Blackwell. His imposing presence had diminished with his injuries. The corporate shark now resembled a beached fish, pale and struggling for survival. "Miss Crawford," he began, federal agents hovering nearby. "I wanted to apologize personally for what happened at your property. Those men were operating without official authorization, a rogue element within our security division." "Save it for your testimony," Emma interrupted coldly. "You threatened my home, endangered my community, and hurt my dog." "There's no apology that makes that right." Blackwell's facade cracked. "You don't understand the pressure we were under. The program produced extraordinary results, but the government wanted to terminate rather than address the ethical concerns properly. Billions in development at risk. We had obligations to shareholders. You had obligations to the truth," Emma countered, "and to the animals your company treated as disposable assets." His expression changed, surprising Emma with what appeared to be genuine regret. "For what it's worth, I always opposed the termination protocols. These dogs represent the most successful canine development program in history. Their cognitive abilities, problem-solving skills, they're unprecedented. Destroying them was always scientific sabotage, regardless of contract terms." Emma studied him, trying to reconcile this apparent admiration with his previous actions. "Yet you were willing to kill to reclaim them." "I wasn't part of that decision," he insisted, desperation edging his voice. "When I discovered certain elements were planning to eliminate witnesses rather than pursue legal channels, I tried to warn you. That's when—" He gestured to his bandaged torso. Emma didn't know whether to believe him, but it hardly mattered now. "Your company is finished, Mr. Blackwell. The only question is whether you go down with it or save yourself by cooperating." He seemed to deflate further. "There's something else you should know. About your dog, Scout." Blackwell hesitated. "He was designated Alpha 7 in our program, the most promising subject from the Enhanced Cognitive Development series. His medical issues weren't unexpected. They're consistent with genetic modifications introduced during the breeding program." Emma felt her blood run cold. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying there's a treatment protocol developed specifically for this condition, tested successfully in earlier subjects. The research exists. Ms. Crawford, it could save your dog." Emma's suspicion warred with desperate hope. "Why tell me this now?" Blackwell's calculating nature resurfaced briefly. "Consider it a gesture of goodwill, my cooperation for information that might save Alpha 7 Scout." Before Emma could respond, Jack appeared in the doorway, his expression thunderous. "That's enough. Blackwell, Miss Crawford isn't negotiating with you." He placed a protective hand on Emma's shoulder. "The FBI has already seized Blackridge's research archives. Any treatment protocols will be identified and made available through proper channels." As Blackwell was escorted away, his parting words lingered. The protocols were never digitized. "Thornton, old-school security measure. The only complete copies exist in one location, and only I know where." That night, as Emma sat beside Scout's bed, watching his labored breathing, Jack paced the small hospital room. "It's manipulative. Classic Blackwell dangling hope to improve his position." "But what if he's telling the truth?" Emma's voice caught. "What if there is a treatment that could save Scout? At what cost? Emma, trading your testimony, compromising the case against Blackridge?" She stroked Scout's head gently, feeling the slight press of his muzzle against her palm, even sedated, seeking connection. "There's no price I wouldn't pay. You understand that, don't you?" Jack's expression softened as he knelt beside her. "I do. That's what worries me." Their conversation was interrupted by Dr. Reichman. Entering with Scout's latest test results, her expression told Emma everything before she spoke a single word. "His condition is deteriorating faster than we anticipated. The internal bleeding has resumed, and his organs are beginning to fail. I'm sorry, but without some kind of intervention—" She didn't need to finish. Emma felt the world narrowing to this single moment, this impossible choice. Behind her, Jack stood silent, strong, offering support without judgment. Before her lay Scout, loyal, brave, extraordinary Scout, fighting a battle his incredible will couldn't win alone. In that sterile hospital room, surrounded by beeping monitors and the sharp scent of antiseptic, Emma Crawford faced the most difficult decision of her life, not just for Scout's survival, but for justice, truth, and what her grandfather had sacrificed everything to protect. 18 months later, Emma stood on the porch of her grandfather's farmhouse, her farmhouse now, fully and legally watching the autumn sunlight paint the distant mountains gold. The air carried the crisp promise of winter, but today remained gloriously warm, perfect for the gathering taking place in the meadow below. The Crawford Canine Sanctuary's grand opening had drawn visitors from across Montana and beyond. Local families mingled with government officials, journalists with veterinarians, all united by interest in the extraordinary story that had unfolded on this remote property. Children laughed as they explored the newly constructed training facilities and visitor center. Funded by the substantial settlement from Blackridge Corporation, Emma smiled as Shadow and Duke demonstrated search techniques for an enraptured audience, their movements precise and purposeful despite their now relaxed lifestyle. Willow supervised a group of therapy dog trainees, ordinary rescues learning from an extraordinary teacher. Ranger patrolled the perimeter with his characteristic vigilance, occasionally accepting gentle pats from visitors he recognized as trustworthy. And Scout, miraculous, resilient Scout, rested in a patch of sunshine near the barn. His once critical injuries healed into barely visible scars. Beside him lay 3 German Shepherd puppies, the first litter born at the sanctuary, their playful antics occasionally drawing a patient correction from their distinguished father. Quite a turnout. Martha observed, joining Emma on the porch. At 80, she moved slower now but remained sharp as ever, her role as the sanctuary's historian keeping her busy documenting the dog's remarkable journey. Your grandparents would be bursting with pride. I hope so, Emma replied softly. She still missed them acutely, especially today, but the ache had transformed from raw grief into something more sustaining, determination to honor their legacy. The investigation into Thomas and Eleanor Crawford's deaths had officially concluded 3 months earlier, while the evidence strongly suggested Blackridge's involvement. The specific perpetrators remained unidentified. Emma had eventually accepted that some questions might never be answered, finding peace instead in the vindication of her grandfather's work. Senator Harris is ready whenever you are, Martha prompted gently. Though he's enjoying Frank Patterson's moonshine a little too much, if you ask me, Emma laughed. Let him enjoy. He earned it. Indeed, Senator Harris had been instrumental in navigating the complex aftermath of the Blackridge scandal. His committee's investigation had revealed corruption extending far beyond a single corporation, resulting in reformed oversight for military contracting and new animal welfare protections for working dogs. The criminal prosecutions continued, with Robert Blackwell's testimony proving pivotal in unraveling the conspiracy. Emma's decision that fateful night in the veterinary hospital had proven more complex than a simple deal with Blackwell. Rather than compromising her testimony, she had leveraged her grandfather's documentation to force a more comprehensive agreement. Blackwell would provide Scout's treatment protocols and testify fully about the program in exchange for consideration during sentencing. The gamble had succeeded beyond expectations. The experimental treatment Blackwell revealed had saved Scout's life and provided valuable research for veterinary medicine. More importantly, the full disclosure of the breeding program had allowed proper care for other dogs still within the system, many now retired to sanctuaries like Emma's. There you are. Jack's voice drew Emma from her reflections. He climbed the porch steps. Handsome in his rarely worn suit, his customary seriousness softened by evident pride. The governor's helicopter just landed. Are you ready for your speech? As ready as I'll ever be, Emma replied, smoothing her dress nervously. Jack took her hand, his thumb brushing over the simple engagement ring he'd placed there 3 months ago. You've faced down armed mercenaries and corporate lawyers. A few dignitaries should be easy. Different kind of courage, Emma murmured. The journey to this moment had transformed her completely. The corporate executive who'd arrived in Pine Ridge, grieving and adrift, had become a respected community leader, dedicated sanctuary founder, and nationally recognized advocate for ethical animal treatment. The outsider had found home in the truest sense in purpose, in place, and in the family she'd created among both humans and dogs. As Emma descended the porch steps with Jack and Martha flanking her, the gathering crowd quieted expectantly. Scout rose from his resting place and trotted to her side, his posture displaying the dignified bearing that no injury or illness had diminished. Together, they approached the podium where Senator Harris waited to introduce her. Ladies and gentlemen, the senator began, it is my profound honor to introduce Emma Crawford, whose courage and perseverance have not only established this remarkable sanctuary, but have fundamentally changed how our nation views its obligations to the animals who serve alongside us. Applause washed over Emma as she took the senator's place, looking out at the faces, once strangers, now friends and allies. She felt momentarily overwhelmed by the journey that had brought them all together. Thank you all for coming today, she began, her voice growing stronger with each word. The Crawford Canine Sanctuary represents many things: a home for extraordinary dogs, a research and training facility, a community resource, but at its heart, it honors a simple truth. My grandfather understood that loyalty deserves loyalty in return. Scout sat attentively at her feet, his intelligent eyes fixed on her face as if understanding every word. 18 months ago, I found 5 abandoned German shepherds in my barn during a blizzard. I had no idea then that they would change my life and many others forever. What began as a simple act of compassion became a fight for justice, truth, and the recognition that relationships between humans and animals should be built on respect, not exploitation. Emma acknowledged Senator Harris and the other officials, whose support had been crucial. She thanked the Pine Ridge community, who had transformed from suspicious neighbors to steadfast allies. She recognized Dr. Coleman, whose veterinary expertise had saved Scout and now guided the sanctuary's health programs. This sanctuary will serve as both haven and headquarters, a place where these exceptional dogs can live with dignity while helping us train the next generation of search and rescue teams, therapy animals, and assistance dogs. Their extraordinary abilities, developed at such cost, will now benefit society through teaching rather than through secrecy or control. As Emma concluded her remarks, Scout suddenly stood and gave a single, clear bark, something he rarely did without specific purpose. The audience chuckled, interpreting it as an affirmation Emma knew better. It was communication from a being whose intelligence and loyalty transcended ordinary expectations, Scout's way of signaling completion, accomplishment, mission fulfilled. She reached down to stroke his head, their silent understanding needing no translation. Later, as sunset painted the mountains in deepening purple, Emma stood with Jack on the same porch where she had once discovered abandoned puppies. Scout lay nearby, watching his offspring play in the yard with the peaceful contentment of a warrior who had found honorable retirement. "Your grandfather once told me that saving these dogs saved him too," Jack said quietly. "I didn't understand what he meant until I watched your journey." Emma leaned against his shoulder, contemplating the sanctuary that had risen from conflict and loss. "Sometimes," she replied, "the things we save end up saving us in return." As night settled over the Crawford Canine Sanctuary, Emma Crawford, once lost, now found, watched the stars emerge above her grandfather's land, understanding at last that home isn't a place but a purpose, and family isn't only defined by blood, but by the bonds we choose to honor. When life brings you to crossroads of loss and uncertainty, remember Emma Crawford's journey. Like many of us in our golden years, Emma faced grief, isolation, and the overwhelming task of starting over. Her grandparents, her anchor, were suddenly gone, leaving her adrift in a world that viewed her as an outsider. How many of us have felt that same displacement, whether through losing a spouse, retiring from a career that defined us, or watching our children build lives far from home? Emma's story reminds us that it's never too late to find purpose again. Through her connection with those abandoned shepherds, she discovered that our greatest strengths often emerge when protecting others. Her community, initially suspicious, eventually rallied around her cause, proving that meaningful connections can form at any stage of life. Most importantly, Emma's journey shows us that our legacies don't end with retirement or loss. Her grandfather's quiet work continued through her hands, touching more lives than he could have imagined, like Scout rising from near death to lead a new generation. We too can transform our wisdom and experience into something that outlasts us, a sanctuary for others seeking their way home. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.